12, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, general laws, chapter 30A, section 18, and the governor's March 15, 2020 order imposing strict limitations on the number of people that may gather in one place. This meeting of the Board of Selectmen is being conducted via remote participation. No in-person attendees of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided for in the order. A reminder that persons who would like to listen or view this meeting while in progress may do so by following the instructions on the agenda and meeting notice. All votes subject to remote participation and therefore will be roll call votes. And today is May 12, 2020. And we'll start by taking a moment of appreciation for our troops serving around the globe in defense of our country. And I think that we want to acknowledge the police and fire for everything that they are doing right now as well. So just a moment, please. Thank you. So we've got several appointments tonight. Ben Rothenstein, State Representative Denise Garlake, Madhuri Coletti, and Town Moderator to discuss, as well as the Board of Health Chair, Carol Reed. So is Ben available? Oh, Ben.
Ben's available.
Hi, Ben.
Hello.
Japanese knotweed.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
Should I begin?
Yeah, why don't you tell us what you've been doing? This is a senior project at Medfield High School, is it?
Yeah, so this is my senior project. I wanted to do a project that involved conservation work in some way. So I was connected with George Darrow at the Conservation Commission, and he specializes in invasive plants. So I've been working with him to study the effects of Japanese knotweed on Medfield and the sort of what comes next with dealing with it. So
Ben actually has a presentation he'd like to share his screen with us tonight.
Oh, excellent.
So here we go. Can everyone see this?
Yep.
Okay. So because of the coronavirus, this has largely been a research-based project as I've been confined to my house. I didn't have access to lab equipment with the school or the ability to go around and interview people or take a proper survey. So this is largely research that I've done that comes from other sources. So this is just some basic information about Japanese knotweed. You can see some pictures of it on the right. It goes by a variety of names. You may know it as fleece flower or wild rhubarb. Those are names that I see a lot. It's got tall, fleshy stems that are hollow and they turn woody in the winter. So you'll see canes of it laying around generally on the sides of the road. It's got broad leaves and clusters of small greenish white flowers. And it leaves these papery fruits called achenes. They're sort of like the helicopters on maple trees. And it has two relatives, giant knotweed and Bohemian knotweed, which is a hybrid of giant knotweed and Japanese knotweed. But I haven't seen any giant knotweed or Bohemian in Medfield. It's just the Japanese variant. So it was introduced from Europe as a decorative plant, and it was planted along riverbanks largely as erosion control until they found out that it accelerates erosion and makes flooding worse because it dries out the soil and it makes the soil looser so that a flood can sweep it all away. It's not, okay. It also has these large root structures called rhizomes. They can spread I've heard up to 20 feet out from the plant. They take nutrients from the soil at an alarming rate, and the plant can spread vegetatively, which means any fragments that are broken off can turn into a whole new plant. It blocks sunlight from hitting the ground, so it kills off native species around it, since it can grow much taller than a lot of them can. And it uses allelopathy as well, which is essentially poison that it puts into the soil and kills all of the plants around it. Its roots are strong enough to undermine building foundations, and it can poke up through roads. And because it has these large branches covered in broad leaves, it can block pathways and trails, and it can block the view of drivers. So this is a map that I found on iPane. It's the Invasive Plant Atlas of New England. So this is Massachusetts, and these are all of the knotweed sightings. And you can see it's pretty widespread. It's actually been established along most of the East Coast. I think it's something like 30 states in total, but it's especially common here. Eradicating it requires massive cooperation and a lot of time. It's spread a lot by human activity, since moving the soil can take pieces of root with it, and those fragments of root can be used to propagate other plants. It has to be constantly cut back year-round. With herbicides like glyphosate, it dies within 3 years. Using only mechanical methods, it can take around 10 years or even more. And I know glyphosate isn't approved for general use in Medfield. The rhizomes can remain dormant for up to 20 years. So at any point, if they are moved, they can spring back up into a whole new stand of knotweed somewhere else or in the same place, decades after it was thought to be eradicated. And the roots can grow 6 feet deep and at least 20 feet out. So it's hard to control the entire thing. So this was some of the experimentation that I was able to do. So this was just a survey, This is just a survey of plant life around knotweed. So as you move closer to a knotweed stand, the number of plant species goes down. So this just shows that knotweed does have a negative impact on plant biodiversity. The next one is soil pH. So I said before that knotweed can worsen the quality of the soil. So this just shows that as you move further away from a knotweed stand, the soil pH rises. So essentially knotweed is acidifying the soil, and this could be an indication of allelopathy, or it could just be that it is removing a lot of minerals from the soil. But either way, it is increasing the concentration of hydrogen ions by about a factor of 50 within only 5 feet. So it clearly has severe consequences. This was a bit of a last minute one. I was trying to find evidence of allelopathy, and I thought that earthworms would be a good indication. They can't live in soil that's been poisoned, obviously. So if the number of earthworms decreases as you get closer to a knotweed stand, then that would be an indication. And it does, and quite dramatically. So in 1 square foot pieces of ground that I dug up, I found that the earthworm population becomes much less dense near knotweed stands. This is a map of the known knotweed locations in Medfield. I took a survey of Medfield residents. Actually, I took several because I didn't get a lot of responses on individual surveys. But this is a map of knotweed density, and as you can see, there's a large stand around where the transfer station is, which makes sense. And also near the Charles, which also makes sense. And then there's one right by Kingsbury Pond that's quite dense, and one not far from the high school as well on Phillip Street. But it's really dispersed all over the town. I know there are stands in other towns near the border that likely contribute to these individual pockets. So there are three main methods that have been used to deal with knotweed in other countries and in other states. So chemical, biological, and mechanical. Chemical is not really allowed in med fields. There are a lot of limitations on which substances you can use, and a lot of them aren't even effective on knotweed and could be environmentally disastrous if used too liberally. So biological control uses these insects. They're called knotweed psyllids, and they are known to eat knotweed in Japan. I believe they were approved by the USDA in some areas, and they've also been used in the British Isles to eradicate knotweed with mixed success. The most reasonable option and the most successful option is mechanical control. So this is just a chart of the schedule. It involves different strategies on different times of year because the plant goes through several cycles each year. It emerges in the spring. It has shoots that you should really cut down before they grow too large, definitely before they flower. As the plant starts to grow in the spring and summer, you have to cut it down regularly. I would say probably every 2 weeks. It should be cut down almost down to the soil. And then in the winter, digging up the roots and properly disposing of them, and I'll get to that in a minute, may work as a way to prevent it from storing up energy so that it can regrow in the spring. So this was another strategy that I explored. This is used on several invasive species in multiple parts of the world, just eating the invasives. Adult knotweed plants are poisonous. They contain high quantities of oxalic acid, which is the same substance that makes rhubarb leaves toxic. But the shoots are edible, and they've been used as a medicinal plant in Japan for many years. They have high amounts of resveratrol, which is a chemical known to boost the immune system, lower blood pressure, prevent heart disease. It can do a lot more than that as well. There are like 10 different medicinal uses. And it's one of the things that makes grapes so healthy, that kind of thing. But the shoots are difficult to prepare. So I went out to Phillip Street and I picked a bunch of knotweed and tried to prepare it at home. And they have this layer of slime. So you have to peel off this fibrous layer of skin. And then there's a layer of slime underneath that, and then another layer of fibrous skin. And all of that is completely inedible. And then I didn't even bother trying to cook it because it was so difficult to prepare, but I've heard that it turns to mush as soon as you cook it. So it's not really viable to eat the invasives in this case. So mechanical control. Starting around the first thaw, you would have to dig up the roots as much as possible so it has less energy to devote to growth. And then every time the plant sprouts, you need to cut it down so that it can't grow those leaves that it needs to soak up all the sun, store it as energy in its roots, and keep going year after year. And also so it can't block out the sun for other plants. So that method will starve the plant and enable the plants around it to compete. If the plant is allowed to flower, it will be pollinated by native insects. They have no qualms about propagating invasive species, and it will go to seed, and those seeds can blow everywhere. They can go miles and set up new stands of knotweed in the middle of nowhere. All removed pieces of knotweed should be stored in a secure container and dried and preferably burned. Once the plant has dried out, it's no longer viable, but any piece of stem, leaf, pieces of root, anything could be used to propagate a whole new plant. So it has to be disposed of very carefully. It can't just be dumped in the woods. It can't be composted. Bringing it to the transfer station, it should be treated like trash. That way it will be incinerated. It definitely shouldn't be thrown into the wood pile because then it will just start growing. No soil from around a knotweed stand should be removed, and it's unlikely that putting a tarp over it and then putting new mulch down and new plants will help because it can grow through concrete, so it can also grow through a tarp. Using this method, it should be eradicated after 6 to 10 years. And obviously, This plant grows on property lines, it grows on public property, it grows on edges and borders. So any method that's used has to respect private property. It has to respect your neighbors. So these are my ideas for solutions. I've done a lot of research on what other countries have done. In Britain, they have a very extreme policy where if you have knotweed on your property, you cannot sell the property to anyone else. If you're looking at a property that has knotweed on it, you cannot get a mortgage for that property. Banks will not lend to you because knotweed is so risky. It's much more established in the UK, so it's much more likely to do damage. It does damage to foundations. It renders houses unsafe. If they find that knotweed has entered the foundation, they may order you to demolish the house. And if they find knotweed, you can use companies like Florum, and I talked to the director of Florum, Richard Schofield. What they do is they dig up the area around the knotweed. They go as far out as the rhizomes go, so something like 10 feet. They go 9 feet down and they remove all of that soil, and that soil is unusable at that point. It gets put in, I don't even know what they do with it. They can't use it, so it just gets thrown away and you get this giant gaping hole in your yard. We don't need to go that far yet because it's not that extreme in Medfield. It's not that extreme in the United States yet. So I came up with the 3 I's, which is information, integration, and incentives. So information, we obviously need to provide resources for the people so that if they have knotweed on their property, they know what to do about it. There needs to be signage at the transfer station to specify that knotweed should not be disposed of as brush. So we could either just have people put it in the regular building where it will be incinerated, or we could create a special bin for dangerous invasives. There are some other plants similar to knotweed that can spread very rapidly that we have in Medfield, like black swallowwort. Then integration. That would be encouraging cooperation between neighbors. Knotweed tends to grow along property lines, like I said. So there needs to be cooperation between neighbors. Neighbors need to be able to tell each other, like, hey, I noticed you have knotweed on your property. Here are some resources for you. And there should probably be a way for neighbors to report if someone lets knotweed on their property get out of control and it spreads to other people's property. So then incentives. I thought of treating knotweed like deposit bottles. So when there was the issue with litter, they created the deposit system where you pay a little bit extra for bottles and cans, and then you deposit them, or you turn them in for your deposit back. And that provided a financial incentive for people to stop throwing out their litter. Knotweed is similar in that it needs to be disposed of properly or it will do environmental damage. So if we have a system for rewarding people for bringing in knotweed to the transfer station and disposing of it properly, then that could help eradicate it in an effective way instead of just spreading it around. Then on the other hand, negative financial incentives. So if you improperly dispose of knotweed on public land, it could be fined. I looked through the bylaws and chapter 140 is about hazardous materials. So I thought knotweed could be treated as hazardous waste. There's already a fine in the bylaws for improper disposal and storage of hazardous materials. Knotweed is an environmentally hazardous material. So if we treat it the same way, then that will provide a financial incentive as well. I believe that's it. Yeah, just works cited. And here are some policies in 4 different countries. So does anyone have any questions?
Questions?
This is a great presentation. And I'm wondering with your map, I mean, since you have the hot zone for the map, if we could post that somewhere. So
Yeah.
people know. The first thing I'm going to do is go out and see if I actually have any of this on my property. I don't know if I do or I don't, but I'm trying to see what I can do about it. This is a very thorough and really impressive. Thank you very much.
I appreciate the analysis too. I did have one question. You said it tends to grow around property lines. I'm assuming Knotweed does not have knowledge of the legal property lines that we have. So what is it about property lines that cause Knotweed to go along property lines?
People don't mow along property lines, and they don't tend to cut down plants that are on property lines because they often don't quite know where the line is, so they just stay away from it. So that gives Knotweed the ideal conditions to grow. It's not being cut down, and it's not being, it's just not being cut down. It's not being killed, so it can grow there.
And another question I had is in your incentives, the negative incentive of penalizing people for disposing of hazardous waste. Do we have any indication that people are doing that in Medfield?
I am not aware that I haven't seen people actually do it. I do know that there is a lot of knotweed right near the transfer station. I've been told that there is actually knotweed right next to the brush pile at the transfer station. I haven't gone there to see it. But clearly if it's growing there, it was put there by someone, so it was improperly disposed of, and it is growing, which means doing environmental harm.
Well, can I push on that for a minute? Because when you describe that, and I think you said there was another hot spot near the Kingsbury Club, and I'm not sure about all the other hot spots, but what I was wondering about is whether areas that are relatively clear, unused, left to themselves, whether that's not in fact a fertile area for knotweed to spread to. So it's more that the environment is causing that than that anybody's dumping anything there. Does that make sense?
Yes, well, so that would be the case probably with Kingsbury Pond. There's a sort of wild area around there where knotweed has been allowed to grow simply because no one's cutting it down. Right next to the grist mill, actually, I think the Department of Public Works did cut it down last summer, but it's going to grow back up again this year because that's what it does. And it's going to keep spreading back over there even if they eradicate it, because of the areas around it, they aren't being cut down. So yeah, I mean, the conditions are not necessarily the fault of people putting it there, but even just like someone driving by with a truck bed full of knotweed that they've just pulled up from their lawn, and a little piece of it falls out along the side of the road, that can grow into a whole new thing. It's not necessarily that it's being purposely improperly disposed of. It's just that people aren't aware of how dangerous it is. So it's carelessness.
And another question I had, first an observation and then a question for you. Your discussion of how to properly dispose of knotweed, and the fact that you mentioned black swallowwort, and I would add garlic mustard to that.
Yes.
There's probably more than that, but at least those, I know for sure around where I live, there's a lot of in fact, I spent the weekend, I filled up 3 bags of garlic mustard. And I would have originally just dumped it because I wouldn't have known any better, but based on a Facebook discussion about 2 years ago, I now bring it to the tipping floor. But a question for you, because you had suggested that possibly it would make more sense for the town to have a hot hazardous plant disposal bin. Every time I bring this to I take a bag to the dumping floor, I am probably dumping about 50 pounds worth of, in my case, garlic mustard and dirt, which I'm sensitive to the tipping charges that we get for getting rid of stuff on the dumping floor or the tipping floor. And you probably haven't looked at this, but I'm actually wondering if that idea of having a bin for people to bring these kinds of hazardous plants to let it dry out so it's burnable, would make economic sense for the town. But if we did it, we probably don't want to just do it for knotweed. We want to do it for black swallowwort. We want to do it for garlic mustard. And the education process would be, I'm guessing if people knew what was bad and they knew what to do with it, they would probably be inclined to fight all fronts. So there may be some synergy here beyond just this Japanese knotweed.
Yeah, I agree. I think given the proper information, people will take care of this issue themselves. We just need to give them the information and also the place to dispose of the plants properly so that it doesn't spread again.
I do appreciate all the work you put into researching this and explaining it to people. This was a good presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ben, congratulations. I thought it was an excellent presentation. And I'm very impressed by the amount of data and information that you shared with us. It was very impressive. So thank you. I had a couple questions. When does it bloom? When those big white blooms? And how tall does it get?
So it blooms in late summer, and it grows between 6 and 10 feet tall. I mean, it depends on the age of the stand. Younger ones will stay around 3 to 5 feet, but as it gets older, it can grow higher or faster because it's already established itself. So it can grow up to 10 feet tall and just block out everything else.
Incredible. One tough plant. So one thought that occurred to me as you and Mr. Murby were talking was that if we had a compost for these hazardous plants, that maybe we could get the compost hot enough that it would render them not dangerous, not viable, I guess would be the goal.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, just leaving it in the sun for a few days would probably be enough to dry it out, at least in the summer. And then if it could be burned on site, that would be even better, just to prevent it from blowing away. If the bin tips over, I'm not sure how big the bin would need to be, but just to reduce the likelihood of anything happening that might spread it more, burning it would be the best solution.
Ben, thank you so much for coming. Chris, do we have any questions for Ben from the audience?
Just a comment from Mrs. Jessica Riley saying, great job, Ben. I saw your survey and I was so glad to be able to see the end project.
Ben, thank you so much for coming and presenting tonight and for doing this for.
Let me jump in. Let me jump in here. Ben, you've done some good work, and I'm not pushing the town for decisions about what we're going to do about this, but it's been a great discussion. I've learned some things I didn't know. And yet if we just have this discussion and that's the end of it, then we'll all tell Ben he did a nice job, and somebody 5 years from now will come in with a similar update that probably has a nastier looking map than this one. What I'm looking for is at least some preliminary thinking on what we might actually do. And I'll make a couple of, I'm not trying to get to resolution. I'm just trying to actually take Ben's information and at least suggest a direction that we may go with it. The first question I had, so my reaction to this is, one important piece of this is education. My guess is that an awful lot of people in Medfield would go after this stuff if they even knew about it. I didn't know about it. I now have to, like Mike, I have to check my backyard because I have this stuff that grows up every year that doesn't grow in a stand that I basically said was American bamboo, not because I knew, but because it's not real bamboo. And I dig it out because I don't want it behind my pool shed. And I just probably throw it somewhere. And maybe that's not what I should be doing with it. So there's an education issue here. And what I'm wondering is whether the education channel, whether we should be looking at the DPW and the transfer station operation as a principal channel for that education, or whether we should maybe be looking for someplace like the Garden Club to see if they would be willing to take up the role of educating the public about what to do with it. That's just, I'll just throw it out as a question. I don't think it's fair to expect us to answer that question tonight, but I think it might be worth thinking about it. And then the other question is whether, as a town, we want people, if they listen to Ben and they apply that maybe to black swallowwort, to this and to mustard garlic, whether as a town, as a policy, we want people to bring what they dig up to the tipping floor to where we dispose of it as rubbish, which means the town is going to pay for it by weight. Whether we want to follow up on Ben's suggestion of having some sort of a hazardous plant disposal bin, which might then have the transfer station folks running some sort of a controlled disposal operation in terms of drying it out and then burning it, or whether, as Pete suggested, we want to explore some sort of a special composting site, which wouldn't involve buying a bin and going through a burning operation, but exploring technical options of composting it under conditions that would destroy it. That might be, I'm guessing, might be a lower cost and higher capacity solution. So I want to just put that out there as the things that occur to me, that what we might want to take from Ben's presentation that would lead ultimately to action. I'm not trying to drive for decisions here. I just would prefer not to have Ben's presentation result in Ben being congratulated on a great job, and then we kind of walk away from it, unless we consciously want to walk away from it.
I agree with you, Gus. I think that what would be a good thing for us to do is to, hello, are you guys hearing me?
Yep, yeah, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay. I wasn't seeing the usual thing that I'm used to seeing that happens when I talk. So the thing that I was thinking of was getting more expert advice from people like George Darrow and maybe some of the gardeners, and then having a calendar where we send out information from the town on our Twitter or on the website, informing people about the garlic mustard and the fact that it's in bloom now, and please go around and pick it up and put it in a bag. Here's what you do with it. Don't do it this way. Don't do it this way. The black swallow wart, is that the other one that's a big one around here?
Yeah.
I mean, I have a ton of that in my backyard. I know I've been trying to get rid of that for years now. But now that, I mean, someone educated me several years about that, so I've been trying to get better about getting rid of it. And I think that would be very helpful for someone like me who isn't expert at this, just to be reminded that this is an invasive species. Here's how to deal with it. So sharing information, I think, would be the best first step.
Ben, could I ask a question? Have you by any chance made this presentation to the Garden Club?
I have not.
Would that be something you'd be, so I don't want to make it sound like we're throwing all the work on you. So that's not where I'm coming from. But would it be reasonable for you to ask you to talk to the Garden Club, and then ask you and the Garden Club to come back to us with recommendations about how we as a town might best do something about this? I mean, certainly education by itself, I think people will do the right thing, but I can picture how this could ultimately lead to some practices that the town endorses or supports. I'm just not sure what those need to be. And I am sensitive to not looking for ways to just spend a lot of money. But if there's something we can do that would, that would enlist the resources in town that know more about this stuff than we do, and then we could figure out a smart way to go about both educating people, but also setting, to be honest with you, part of my concern right now is that the more people learn about this, the more bags of garlic mustard, black swallowwort, and this are all going to be showing up at the tipping station. And I'm okay with that if that's the absolute best thing we can do. But if there's smarter solutions, that might be a good thing. If that would be something you'd be willing to do, and then maybe with the understanding you can let the Garden Club know we're actually looking just for their thoughts, however they would best like to convey them. That might be a way for us to take a next step forward here.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Okay. Is that's my idea. Pete and Mike, it sound like it's okay from your standpoint?
Yeah, I think that's good.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Ben, was this your senior project?
Yes.
So you're done with the Medfield High School then now? Where are you headed next?
I'm going to Connecticut College.
Excellent. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming to our meeting tonight. Chris, I see that there are more questions. Do we have more questions for Ben?
The most questions we've had since we started this. Ms. Coletti just wanted to say very informative. Great job, Ben. And then Teresa James, who's on our planning board, said, who would they reach out to for a property visit to help identify invasive plants that we might not know are on or not on our property?
That is a good question. I would say probably the Conservation Commission.
I think I would agree with you, Ben. I think I can put Ms. James in touch with our Conservation Commission agent or with Mr. Darrell and have them have a discussion. Good. Okay.
Anything else, Chris, or is that it?
Nope, I think that's it for Ben,
Okay.
and then we can get on to our next agenda item. Thank you, Ben.
Ben,
It was great working
thank
with
you,
you.
Ben.
on this.
Good luck
Thank
in
you.
college.
Thank you, Ben. That was great.
And I just, yeah, there we go.
Oh, you got to upgrade Representative Garlic. Thank you.
Hold on one sec.
So our next appointment is with State Representative Denise Garlic, Vice Chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, probably Chair of something else. Denise, you'll fill us in, I hope.
She's coming in, and
And
then,
you're going to give us the bad news about the state budget.
okay.
So
All right. Denise there?
I'm here.
Oh, there we are.
Yeah.
Hi,
Okay.
Denise.
Hi,
Thanks for
everyone.
coming.
Good evening. And it's a pleasure to see you all, even remotely. And I too was fascinated by Benjamin's presentation. That was fascinating. I did get worried every time someone said mustard garlic, though, that we were going to throw it out. But so I just wanted to very briefly, I know how very intense these meetings are when we're trying to do them remotely. So I wanted to take just a little bit of time for an update. I wanted to share with you that my goals are to share the information on the legislative work that has taken place so far and talk to you about remote voting by the House of Representatives, to discuss our budget status currently, and just to continue to enhance our town and state partnership that we have together. But before I do that, I want to thank Christine, and through Christine, the Medfield staff, and thank each of the selectmen for your public service and the work that our Public Health Department and Public Works Department and Public Safety departments are doing, I think is leading to the real stability in our communities in what we know is an overwhelming public health and financial crisis. So I just wanted to go to the first slide if possible, Christine. And the first slide just deals with the legislative relief. This slide is the work that has taken place by the House of Representatives since March 10th, when we were working in informal sessions only. And for the residents who may be listening, in informal session, a great deal of work can get done by the legislative branches, but it can only get done if there is unanimous support for it. And on any piece of legislation that is presented for which there is one voice of dissent, that legislation cannot go forward. So in informal session with unanimous consent, we were able to pass legislation that Medfield is currently using to allow the town to waive penalties for taxes and fees, to allow for the local election delay. But I do congratulate Medfield on getting their election done, to give the town budget flexibility, to allow town meeting postponement. And there is now some talk at the state level around remote town meetings and what that might be able to look like. I think as onerous as that is for representative town meetings, it's mind-boggling to think about it for an open town meeting. But those discussions are taking place. And we prohibited termination of services like water and electricity. For the residents, one piece of major legislation we were able to get through in informal session with unanimous consent of both the House, the Senate, and the governor's signature was on local and regional public health. And I just want to share with you, this is the bill that I sponsored, but it wasn't in response to COVID-19. I have worked on this issue for 6 years. and the state legislature bringing forward a bill to establish a commission to study local and regional public health. And then from the commission's 2-year work with recommendations, writing the legislation for this. I think it's a powerful bill. I think it will be very helpful to Medfield now and in the future. We know that some health departments and public health boards are strong in the Commonwealth, but we know many, many, many more needed to be strengthened. And this allows for voluntary participation in memorandums of agreement to find the strengths in neighboring boards of health and to build on those strengths to improve the education for the people who serve on those boards of health and for the health staff through the support of the Department of Public Health, and to have a concerted blueprint to move our boards of health into a 21st century understanding of health foundations and what public health should look like. So the work on this bill was long before COVID-19, but I think the benefit of this bill is going to be in this time and in the years that will follow. We also moved on eviction and foreclosure moratorium for residents and small businesses both. And we worked on the issue of MCAS relief and got MCAS relief. We delayed the tax deadline to July 15th, but that's going to have an impact on our next discussion around the budget and around liability, legal protections for healthcare workers, as we were bringing people back from people that had retired, people that were returning to healthcare arena, healthcare workers that were working in new and different environments. We wanted to make sure everyone had the confidence to do the best work that they could. And we moved on virtual notarization, although that bill has a sunset clause in it. So those were the kind of things we were able to do in informal. As of last week, the House of Representatives now has the capacity to vote remotely. It's a very complicated issue to protect the integrity of the vote, the voice of the individual representatives, and to work on the issues of public health access, where not everyone had the same hardware, not even everyone who's a representative has broadband access in Massachusetts, and to make sure that there was equity in the way that people would be participating in the process. I believe we are one of the first legislatures in the country to actually establish and vote remotely. And that means that as we move forward, I'm in formal session again tomorrow, that we can move the issues of the Commonwealth forward that deserve discussion and deliberation and debate before we vote. So the second slide that I wanted to share with you is around the budget and the economic indicators. I know that you all know, as everyone who's listening knows, that we are in an overwhelming public health and financial crisis. Massachusetts had a decline of 6.1% in their gross domestic product in just the first quarter of this year now. The number of workers that have filed for unemployment claims since March 15th actually is now over 1 million. And for the towns that I represent, Needham, Dover, and Medfield, this is the #1 issue that I get called on by our constituents, is the issues around unemployment that are devastating to people. And you may recall that, and Pete told you that I'm the vice chair of Ways and Means. Well, in December, the Ways and Means held a revenue hearing in which we bring in economists from across a wide spectrum and ask them for their predictions on what revenue will look in the upcoming year. And then we take all of those predictions together and we meet, and there is an agreed on estimate of revenue that the legislature and the governor together agree on. And that's how we build the first budget, which is the governor's budget in January. After that December hearing, the agreed amount was a 3.4 increase in revenue for the upcoming year. And that's, you see the governor's budget in January, and that reflects that kind of confidence as we're moving forward. The second budget that happens is the House of Representatives uses the governor's bill, but actually builds our own bill as well. And that traditionally happens in late April. And then the Senate looks at those two budgets, builds their budget, and is the third budget that we usually see voted on in the third week in May. Well, as you can imagine, we're all off track on timing right now, but more importantly, we had to reconvene all of the experts who talked to us about revenue. And now, in fact, the prospect is very grim about our finances as we move into the beginning of the Commonwealth's budget ends on June 30th, particularly as we move into the next budget following June 30th. And now what's being predicted is a $4 billion to $6 billion deficit in the state budget. This is a huge impact. There is not a lot of discretionary spending in the state budget, just like in our town. You know, as you're building your budget, there's not a lot of discretionary money. The people who had served, I was not a state representative in 2008, but the people who are my colleagues who served at that time have been sharing the impacts of the 2008 recession and what it looked like at the state level and what it looked like at the municipal level. And at that time, there were furloughs of state workers. There was 9C cuts to the budget, which is cutting agencies' current budget status. And there were cuts to local aid. That was a $2 billion deficit. We are looking at a deficit now that is 2 to 3 times larger than that. So having said that, though, today is May 12th. We actually don't know what the deficit is presently until we can get to July 15th, because we've all moved the tax filing deadlines. There are many people in the Commonwealth who haven't filed their state taxes, who have the capacity to do so, but because the deadline is moved and they're dealing with a myriad of other issues right now, they haven't filed their taxes. We need to see what that impact is. The second thing that isn't clear yet is if the federal government is going to blunt some of these costs. Anyone who's following the news today saw that Governor Baker is now asking the legislature for $1 billion. The first vote that I had was on a bill that was called the RANS bill. That means the Revenue Anticipation Note. The Revenue Anticipation Note is essentially you're bonding money to yourself in the state, saying that we know this revenue is coming in, but we don't have it yet. The request that Governor Baker has for this $1 billion is directly related to our ability to do that now. He is saying in the press that he is confident that the federal government will reimburse that money, that traditionally it will go, we have to demonstrate our costs, and then those costs are evaluated by FEMA and will get reimbursed. Those costs that we have used, I've been, you know, I'm very, very proud of Medfield and Medfield's government and its commitment to its people. I'm equally as proud of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and the money that we've used in the last 6 weeks has been around the purchasing of PPE, even though I do want to tell you that many hospitals, human service providers, group homes, they had to purchase PPE on their own, right, and purchase it through the organization. But we also did a rate adjustment for the human service workers when after Hurricane Katrina, I had an opportunity to volunteer in Mississippi. And one of the stories that I carried with me, one of my lessons learned was many of the losses of life in Mississippi were people who lived in group homes and in nursing homes, people with developmental disabilities, people with mental health issues, the children that may have been in the care and custody of the state, where the workers just no longer showed up. And so these people were left alone, isolated, and suffering, and many died. And so I was part of the conversations to ensure that there would be a rate adjustment for the human service workers in Massachusetts to help keep people on the job. And we moved ahead with that. We've utilized money for National Guard pay. You know, the National Guard's out there doing the testing in nursing homes with now all nursing home residents and all staff. And that there's many costs when we're talking about this contact tracing. There's upfront costs to launch that. And we've also mobilized money for housing for people who are homeless individuals and families. So I'm very supportive of the money that we've utilized. I think we've utilized that money well. And I'm very hopeful that our governor is right and the federal government is going to reimburse that money. And further, that they're going to help to blunt the cost of some of this. Excuse me. Even when somebody coughs on the phone, it's hard, isn't it? At this time, I can take questions. Excuse me, excuse me. So are there any questions?
There was a question from our audience asking if you could put a percentage from Jess Riley was asking if you had a percentage decline in the budget. That $4 to $6 billion decline is what percent of the budget?
So it's a $43 billion budget.
So it's a huge percentage.
Yeah, yeah. Especially when you think that so much of that money is already accounted for. There's not a lot of discretionary money there. It's a huge hit.
Yeah, because Medicaid is about 45% of the state budget. And so that's just.
That's right. And, you know, one of the other things we did is certainly opened up the health connector. And there are many more people that are in Mass Health now than this time 6 months ago.
Denise, this is probably a too specific a question for you to be able to answer at this point, but I'll ask it anyway. If the governor is optimistic that the federal government is going to reimburse the state for its costs associated with this emergency, is for our purposes as we think about our budget and to the extent that we have costs that we've incurred. And Christine, I think you're tracking the costs that we could properly allocate to this. Do you have any sense of how, if the governor is right and if the federal funding comes down, what our expectations might be at the local level for how that would then further distribute to offset costs that we've incurred at the local level?
So Gus, I can only give you what is my gut instinct. I don't know this for fact. But I
knew
think
it wasn't
that,
a fair question, but
no, but I think the town administrator's ability to track all of the costs, to be able to document that, that's going to be vital as we move forward. The money that would come in from FEMA, we have to account for all of those dollars, where they were, how they were spent, how they were utilized, then where we are going to put that. I know the House of Representatives is going to have an oversight committee on money that's coming into the state from, and you know, there's a lot of revenue streams connected with how money's going to come into the state. So we want to track it pretty carefully. And my experience has always been that they will hold the municipalities to a much higher standard as well.
Any questions, Mike?
I know questions for me.
Hey, Mike.
I guess I would just say that anything that you can do to help us hold a town meeting, I think remotely is probably the best way. So yeah. I would encourage that. And I guess I would follow up and ask the question that I asked you at your report to the town, which was, I know that there's some new money coming Medfield's way under the education changes that were put into effect. And at that time, you didn't really have an idea of what that amount might be. And I just wondered if you had an idea now.
So I don't have any better ideas, Pete, okay. But I did call the chair of education today because I did know that this was important to you. And what she did say to me is, although we are very uncertain now, that in the recession of 2008, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts tried to hold whole both education and local aid. And that was accomplished, with the money that came in from the federal government. So although that's not a promise, it certainly is a principle that I believe that we will continue to try and uphold. I think with the Student Opportunity Act, it is unclear how robustly we can move into the future with that presently, but I believe that we will still hold those principles to the very best of our ability.
Thank you.
And I will just say, as a matter of history, Pete, I believe, regardless of what line was held by the state in 2008 and 2009, the town did have overrides in 2008 and 2009.
I think
As you
local aid,
remember having been here.
yeah, I think local aid did get cut substantially. And that it
I
took
guess-
several years to get back to the same local aid that we had before 2008.
So that's my question, Representative Garlick, is that we're talking to all of our colleagues in other towns. As you know, town administrators love to chat.
Right.
You know, we're hearing anywhere from reducing an overall 10% of our local state aid to up to 25%. Do you have a recommendation as to what we should utilize going forward?
I don't, Christine, and I would be unfair to even speculate.
It's unfair for me to ask you, but I have to ask you.
No, and I've heard this whole variety of the speculation on that. And I've also heard that need to try and hold it whole and backfill it, which is what happened in 2008. Even though there was a deficit, it was backfilled with the federal money. And depending on how individual towns at that time, in 2008, I was a selectman in the town of Needham. We used that ARA money on education, and that's how we held it whole. So I think it's going to depend on the monies that we see and the decisions around how it's going to be utilized. And I'm sorry not to be able to give you a prediction, but that wouldn't be helpful. What I do know, or what I do believe, is this is not a time for anyone to be really reactionary. You know, I don't think it's a time for us to, I've been asked, can we go into that stabilization budget right now? And can we make towns whole right now? Can we do that? I've been asked, should we be laying off people? Do we have to do this right away? I think we really are in a one step at a time mode right now. And it's hard for people that are planning, but right now we just don't know. And I think we have to get to July 15th.
Thank you.
Denise, again, I'm probably asking you another unfair question, or one you won't have a definitive answer to, but I want to lay out a picture here for what I think, and Pete might correct me if I've got any of this wrong. At our meeting last week, we had delayed the election to the date that we were planning for the town meeting. We delayed the town meeting to the 15th of June. Last week, we did not decide when to reschedule the town meeting, but we did recognize that because we weren't confirming that the town meeting would be on the 15th of June, we effectively were deciding it wasn't going to be the 15th of June. And right now, if I apologize if I'm getting into more legal details than you want to or are prepared to, but based on the inputs we got last week from our town council, the selectmen have the legal ability to delay the town meeting up until the 30th of June. And presumably tonight, we're going to be talking about doing something to pick a fallback that's not the 15th of June, that fits within our limits of not being later than the 30th of June. The situation as we understood it last week of the legislation is that the selectmen have the authority to continue to fund the town going into FY21 on what, for my purposes, I would call continuing resolution authority on a month-by-month basis, and that's fine. So we can authorize budgets. We've confirmed that the town can send out prospective tax bills that are effectively a continuation of our current tax bills, so we can collect revenue. The selectmen do not have the authority, as we understand it at this point, to reschedule a town meeting for next September. The only legal mechanism we currently have to do anything other than run a town meeting in June is to have the town moderator extend it in 30-day increments out until presumably we'd make it to September before an emergency order would be lifted. the problem, so what I'm getting at right now, that's kind of the kludge that we're going to put together possibly if we were to delay the town meeting to the fall. If we don't delay the town meeting to the fall, we are going to have to make a planning decision about what budget we're looking to have approved in June. If we were to run forward with a June meeting, which is kind of where we're headed right now. And the biggest open question for us is we have some issues around projecting declines in local revenues, but clearly the biggest open question for us between a 10% and 25% reduction in state aid is, if you do the math against an $8 million or so total state aid into the town, it kind of, that range and the planning that we're going to have to go through in order to have a budget that we vote on in a town meeting before the 30th of June is the dilemma that we have. I guess first, if there's anything that I misunderstand about the current legal authorities that the selectmen and the town moderator and everybody have, please correct me, but any advice you have about how we should think about this, both in terms of timing of the town meeting and how we should think about this if we do an early town meeting around the budget that we target to get passed in that town meeting, not holding you to it, but recognizing our position, what advice do you have for us?
So my advice is to let your state rep know what your questions are and let me see if I can find some answers. I know that some towns are actually doing a month-to-month budget. That's what they're anticipating doing. I think that there's discussion around, we extended the town meeting deadline. There is some discussion happening about whether it's going to be extended further. There's a bill pending about remote town meetings and how that could be done. I just always think of Medfield with the open town meeting and how do we plan for that? If you can just get me questions, Gus, that's the best way I can serve you, is try and find the answers. I wouldn't pretend to you I know those answers.
Okay. Fair enough.
Well,
Thanks, Denise.
So Denise, I would just suggest to you that from what I've seen from Zoom so far, I think we could run an annual town meeting on Zoom just fine.
Pete, certainly under the circumstances, I agree with you. The only point I'd make is I think as a practice, I think that means we will focus on non-controversial articles, nothing that's radical change, nothing that's likely to be controversial. So we could do that, and I would be in favor of doing that as long as it's a straightforward town meeting in terms of the articles that we take on.
I guess I disagree with you a little bit because I think we could discuss controversial things as well. I don't think it's going to be that different.
Yeah. And the reason I disagree is because in the open town meetings that we've had, those controversial articles have had some of the most eloquent speakers appearing before the people present in the town meeting, making their case. And they're eloquent on both sides and only one side wins. I'm skeptical that same dynamic can be established in a Zoom format.
And I would also be concerned too about accessibility. I mean, we assume that everybody knows how to use it. Everybody has a computer. Everybody has great Wi-Fi and internet. I don't know that that's true for everybody in town. Particularly, there may be a number of seniors who aren't necessarily Zoom experts at this point, and for whom it would present challenges. So, we'll see what the authorization is. We'll see what the rules are, and we can talk it through. But I'm not as sanguine as Pete is about the ability to conduct a town meeting over Zoom that resembles anything like our usual legislative activities at an open town meeting. I think if we were going to do it remotely, I think we'd have to have it be more orchestrated and organized. And I don't think you could have just an open forum for participation. I think you'd have to have some sign up in advance as to who is going to speak on particular issues. You'd have to have some, because I just know from the video conferences that we hold at work or on business calls, if you had 10 people on the phone and you throw it open, suddenly it's like you're in the Lord of the Flies within like 5 minutes. So I think you have to If we were to go remote with it, I think there'd have to be a lot more orchestration, and we couldn't just rely upon the good judgment and skills of our moderator to kind of see what happens and manage it through. And the accessibility issue, I think, would be the one that would really give me a lot of pause. If somebody were to say, well, I didn't know how to get on Zoom, or I only could get on for part of the time, or I could only call in, whereas they've been coming to town meeting for 30 years, I would not want that person to be disenfranchised, particularly if there were other alternatives. So right now we can't do it. I think we got to see what the rules are. But I would be a little more cautious than you, Pete, about being able to do it. And if we did it, we'd have to do it a lot differently.
I agree that it'd have to be done differently. I think that is doable. I think that people can call into a Zoom meeting, so I think it is basically available to everybody.
Hello, Denise. This is Scott. How you doing?
Hey, Scott, I'm wonderful.
Question about the status of the legislation that I know has been pending about providing for the reduction of the quorum and the limitation of consideration of certain articles to budgetary articles. We were anticipating maybe that might be something that would pass last week. Seems to be somewhere, kind of in the legislature. Any thoughts on the status of that particular piece of legislation? I think it's the same legislation that for representative town meetings has the provisions for, holding those meetings remotely. But I think earlier in that legislation, it made provision for the ability for open town meeting jurisdictions to be able to reduce the quorum and also to be able to limit the consideration of the articles. Any thoughts?
Yeah, so that's actually a great example of why it is now very beneficial that the House of Representatives can vote remotely. The Senate established their ability to vote remotely for one bill only, and now they're supposed to be going back to the drawing board to figure out how to vote remotely. The idea about reducing the quorum was actually a subject of a lot of discussion. And if you reduce the quorum too much, were you disenfranchising other people? Could a small group of organized people now have an undue influence on the town's government and how the town was going to move forward? So it's the kind of thing that we need to be able to do in a formal session when we can really debate it and come to an agreement about if there's a number, what does that number actually look like?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
This is Mark
Mark.
Sorrell, the town attorney. It's my understanding that the Senate passed that bill and it was sent to the House for action, and it's pending somewhere in the House.
I would trust your read on that, Mark, but I know that in the House there's a lot of discussion about what that actually means and what is the proper percentage that would be
Right.
helpful.
Although I would point out, as I indicated, I think last week, there are towns that don't have quorums for town meeting in their charters.
So I guess the other concern then is if we don't have a reduction in quorum and the governor doesn't lift the 10-person advisory or order, then we can't go forward with town meeting because our quorum is 250 people. Do we have an estimate of when we think that order will be lifted? Yeah. So
No,
that
everything that Governor Baker is saying is that he's going by the evolving data. So
Right.
there's no way you can predict that until you actually see the numbers.
So just to drive that home, Christine, last week we recognized that effectively by not picking a date for a town meeting last week, we were deciding it would be later than the 15th of June. I'm not sure we're hearing enough tonight to be able to pick a date for a meeting this week, which tells me at the very least it's not the 22nd of June, which is okay. We were talking about the 27th, which is a Saturday. But if we don't, basically we're in a box where we can't conduct a normal town meeting because of restrictions. We can't conduct a reduced town meeting because the quorum change hasn't gone through, and we don't know for sure what we'll have a hard time making we'll be able to make a painful decision about our target budget for a town meeting this June, which may or may not be as bad as it really is going to be. Or our other option is to limp through the summer a month at a time through the good offices of our town moderator taking care of the scheduling of the meeting, and us using our continuing my term, continuing resolution authority to get us through the summer. I guess what I'm saying is, what I'm seeing is a picture here that within a week, we are boxed into not having a town meeting. And by default, we're going to have a town meeting sometime in next fiscal year. By preference, we would probably have it in the early, not in the middle of the summer, but at some point after the summer is over.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, go ahead, please, Mark Sorrell.
Yeah, just to dovetail on what Selectman Murby says, even if that legislation passes, it's got time constraints built right into it at the moment, because you have to have a public hearing posted with notice at least a week before the Selectmen make the determination to reduce the quorum, and then you have to notify the Attorney General no less than 10 days subsequent to that. So it seems like there's at least a 2-week plus period that they're throwing in there as far as scheduling the town meeting. So unless you're scheduling it way towards the end of June under the present scenario, your chances of complying with that don't look very bright to me.
And I guess I would add that my thought is that we don't want to get trapped into a scenario where we're trying to hold a town meeting in July or August because the emergency's been lifted and we don't have the ability to continue it to September. So that's just a thought.
Well, that was a concern I raised last week, yeah.
So Mark, I guess I had my question then, with the legislation that passed prior that says we could go beyond June 30th to have a town meeting.
It's tied into the emergency declaration.
Right, but if the emergency declaration is in place now, which is forcing us to move a town meeting to the fall, there wouldn't need to be the emergency declaration in place for the new date for it. We're making that decision now because the emergency declaration is in place.
Right, but the Selectmen's authority, which was not changed by any legislation, is to push it out to June 30th. That's it. That's what it was before, and it wasn't affected by any of the remedial legislation. The additional authority was given to the moderator for these 30-day increments, so long as the governor's declaration of emergency is still in effect. So hypothetically, going back to what Pete just raised, if the governor lifts it and the moderator can only go 30 days and now the emergency's been lifted, you could hypothetically have a situation, as I read it, where you'd have to have it over the summer.
Yeah, I'm just going to suggest, though, and I love hypotheticals as much as the next law school graduate, but the hypothetical where the emergency declaration being lifted is one of the earlier events in this whole process seems to me to be extremely unlikely. I mean, the Los Angeles County is announcing they're extending it by 3 more months. And, we've been out on the end of the far right end of this sort of thing. So I would say we can spin out the hypotheticals all we want, but I would remove the variable of suddenly the governor decides a week from now that we're going to zip right ahead from, turquoise red flag to green red flag or whatever it was on that color coded chart and suddenly be fine. I mean, I think let's put that one to aside and deal with what we can deal with now. I think we should expect that some sort of state of emergency will be in effect for an extended period of time. No one's talking about we're just going to go back to everything being the way it was. Even if the order is modified, I suspect there will still be an emergency order, and I'd bet heavily on there still being something called an emergency order in September as well.
I tend to agree with you, Mike. I just think it's important to let Denise know that it would be a good thing to carry back to the state government, that don't put us in a bind where we end up having to have a town meeting in July or August.
Yep, I agree with
factor
that.
that in.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Maybe you could mention that at the warrant committee meeting on Monday night, they did set a date for the warrant hearing, because we're also bounded by the charter requirement of having a warrant committee hearing no less than 30 days prior to a town meeting. So they ended up choosing, did they finalize what date they were going to hold the warrant hearing?
No, it was depending on what we voted tonight for town meeting. But the other issue that will hold them up is whether or not we're taking up just the budgetary articles or if we're taking up the entire warrant, because that will be the subject of what the warrant hearing is. So it's a
And this
difference
is-
between 15 articles and 42 articles.
Right, but I mean, we're not, it sounds like we're not going to have the town meeting on June 15th. I think there's a consensus here of that. And it's probably not going to have it before June 27th. So can they schedule the warrant hearing sometime between now and May 27th? And then how far in advance of the warrant here? As I recall, typically the draft warrant is handed out at the warrant hearing.
Correct.
And so you would, if you schedule the warrant hearing, you again give yourself a window starting 30 days after the date of that warrant hearing to hold the town meeting. And then we have the time between now and that warrant hearing as the Board of Selectmen to decide what's going to be on that warrant.
Correct.
Could I just check one thing in this conversation? I thought I understood that when we were talking about having a town meeting in June, whatever the date is, that there was not a question, but that the warrant, or maybe there is, but the warrant that we would then be reviewing, or we would be voting on in June, would be that reduced financial article warrant of the 15 articles, if that's what it is, not the 42 articles. Is that an open issue, or is that?
Well, that provision, I think, was linked to the reduction of the quorum. At least the requirement of it was in the legislation.
Okay.
So it was connected to upon reducing the quorum, that put a limitation on the articles that could be considered, and to the ones that were budgetary or required some kind of federal.
Because if we're doing all 42, I feel even more strongly that's something we should be doing in the fall, not trying to rush through in the next month.
Yeah, I agree with that, Gus. But I think even apart from this legislation, I mean, the selectmen in general control the warrant for the town meeting. And so with the exception of any articles that we're required to place on there and can't remove by the town charter, I think we could narrow the warrant.
Okay.
That's my understanding. Mark or Christine, tell me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that the warrant report and the warrant is under the town charter is a production of the Board of Selectmen.
Correct.
Warrant report technically is a statutory requirement that essentially a FinCom or a warrant committee give to the voters for annual town meeting. Then the hearing is part of the charter, so they're coming from different sources.
Right, but the content of the warrant itself, Mark, I mean, can the selectmen, if we decide, but regardless of what the legislature does, if we decide to limit the warrant just to the articles necessary to keep the town government open and to get us to the fall when we can have something resembling a more substantive town meeting under whatever format we have it in the fall, because I don't know that anybody's assuming we'll have 500 people in the gym in the fall either. Is that true, or would we have to have the full-blown 42 articles if we have any sort of town meeting absent state legislation?
There's legal and there's practical. Let's just say that I'm familiar with the fact that selectmen and other municipalities, regardless of what their authority is, are winnowing down their warrants to the essentials on a cooperative basis. For instance, the Medway Board of Selectmen talked with the Planning Board and convinced them to pull all the zoning articles. So it's been done cooperatively on the basis of what's essential and the exigencies we're dealing with. So that would be the approach to try to take, would be to go back to those articles that are not under your control, look at the sponsors and try to come to some common understanding.
The dilemma for me in thinking about it is that I I have one strong view if we're trying to address a full raft of warrant articles. I have a different view if we're looking at a reduced list of warrant articles trying to keep the town running. And so it's kind of, to me, and we, I guess, at most have 2 weeks to figure this out with all of the pending legislation on one side, the uncertain budget guidance on the other side. And now we're adding in another layer of potential uncertainty. I don't know, maybe it's not controversial what I'm talking about, but we potentially could be laying in a layer of uncertainty around whether everybody that has a stake in this is okay with moving ahead with a pared down set of articles in June, if we even can pull off a meeting. It's like these are all connected and we kind of have to get them all sorted out, and they all pretty much, as I see it, have to be sorted out. If not this week, probably almost by next week, in order to have a prayer of getting this all orchestrated. Yeah, getting it orchestrated to run a meeting in June, not to get it orchestrated for the fall.
So just looking quickly at the warrant, I would say that all except for a handful of articles are all sponsored by the Board of Selectmen. So the Board of Selectmen can make that decision to keep or not keep. I did have a conversation with Sarah about moving the planning board articles to the fall, and she did not think there would be a problem with doing that. There was nothing that we were urgently looking to pass.
She just posted something about that too, Chris, on the question and answers.
Yes, yeah.
Just so,
Glad to see I'm quoting her exactly as she told me.
just to clarify, it's not within the purview of the moderator to extend the date of the town meeting to the fall, correct? My sense of it is that you can extend it for 30 days under the emergency, and then if the conditions exist, you know, at the end of that 30 days, then you have the option of being able to extend it for another 30 days.
Correct.
So if we extended to June 15th, it would be within my authority, I assume, that as we approach June 15th, to extend it again, but it would only be for another 30 days to July 15th. And then I agree with
Well, that's once the warrant gets posted. So the selectmen have the authority up till June 30th, and my recommendation would be for the board to push it out as far as possible, to give you that much more leeway as you start to have to implement these 30-day increments.
Sure.
And I mean, I concur with Mike that it's highly unlikely that the governors would just lift his emergency declaration, but it is referenced in the legislation.
And how long can the selectmen wait to post the warrant? When
The warrant for the annual town meeting has to be posted, I think, was it a week before? It's only a week
7 days.
or 10 days.
7 days. Yeah.
7 days?
7 days. I think, Mark, maybe not you and I can reach out and have a discussion tomorrow, but I think there's an advisory from the DLS on April 3rd, which will allow the selectmen to go past the June 30th deadline. So maybe you and I can touch base on that tomorrow.
Okay.
And Christine, to be clear, you've been going through those articles. You're saying most of the articles are sponsored by the Board of Selectmen. The other articles are Planning Board, and there are no other articles
There's
sponsored.
there's one article by the Medfield Energy Committee.
Which is not under, they're an appointed committee of the Board of Selectmen, but not under the control of the Board of Selectmen for the articles they submit.
The problem is we have a charter provision that authorizes the majority of any town board or committee to submit an article, and it never specified elected or standing committees as opposed to ad hoc committees. So
I just want to know what the layout on the ground is here. So in the same way that the planning board, if we were to do this and we were to look at a stripped down warrant, not only would we want to know that the planning board is agreeable to that, we either as a Board of Selectmen would need to decide that we think the Energy Committee's article needs to be in this early session, or the Energy Committee would need to agree, like the Planning Board, to defer it to the fall.
Yes.
So for me, those are two questions I'd want to know before we commit one way or the other to a fall date, or to a June date, excuse me.
So do we have anything else for Denise before we move
No.
on?
If it's helpful, Pete, the pending legislation that is before the House, I can get a copy of that to Christine tomorrow morning
Thank you.
and really get input on what Medfield sees as its needs.
That would be great. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Thank
Hey,
you. So,
Denise.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. It would also be helpful, Representative Garlick, if you could give us some sense of the timeline on what's happening there or likely to happen, because that's as important as the contents of it.
Okay, thanks, Mark.
Denise, you started off by thanking our first responders and our town government.
Yeah,
I'd like to, I'm not sure that state reps always get thanked for the hard work they're doing. Thank you.
thank you. Thank you.
and we appreciate getting your daily updates. So thank you for doing those for us
Yeah.
too.
Yep, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Good night, everyone.
Good night, Denise.
Good night, Representative.
Our next item on our list. Oh, Chris, were there any more questions before? Well, Denise is gone. Too late.
No, some questions regarding about town meeting. Let's see.
And those will be when Scott comes up in a moment, I guess. We can get back to him.
Yeah, why don't we hold that until Scott comes up? Let me just get Maud to the meeting. Hold on one
I do have
second.
one
All right.
question from Steve Resch. And I think the answer is he is correct.
So our next appointment is with Madhuri Coletti. Discuss the rolling graduation plans for Medfield High School class of 2020. Welcome to the meeting.
I hope she's still with us. I told her she'd be on at 7:45.
She is. Good. Good evening.
How are you doing?
Very
Thank you for
fine.
having me. I feel like I might be echoing. Oh, let me.
You're muted now. You're still on mute.
All right, I'm going to take that off. I'm going to get rid of my phone then. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Excellent. Well, thank you for having me. I am actually here representing, I don't think I can hear you guys well, so I'm sorry. Give me 1 second. I screwed something up. I should know this better. I'm like, feel like I'm a Zoom pro and I'm messing it up for you guys.
I hear you just fine.
All right, I'm sorry if I'm echoing.
Not at all.
Okay, great. So thank you. I'm here was one of the parent organizers working with Dr. Marsden and some other officials within town on the rolling rally. And so I honestly don't know the extent that you're familiar with it. Is it helpful to give an overview?
Sure, please. And there are a lot of people listening who may not be familiar with it. So
Okay, excellent.
we saw a slide of the route earlier today, so we're a little bit better informed than we were yesterday.
Well, that's great. I'm going to try to get through this without getting emotional. I have a senior. This is the last week for our seniors in Medfield. And we all know that the year-end events that they look forward to have been canceled, including graduation. And so with the support of Dr. Marsden and all of you and the officials, were able to move forward and make their graduation day a senior celebration day. So it's actually going to happen on May 31st at 1 p.m., which would normally be their graduation day and time. So this was just announced to the students last week. And the premise comes from a tradition that has historically been in the town for a couple of years now, where normally the students would have gone back to their elementary schools and they would have walked the halls of all the schools that they attended in Medfield prior to graduation. And they would have done that in their gowns, and they would have got to see some of their former teachers. In the younger schools, they would have been greeted by our young students in town and would have made their way through, which is really just I think a nice event that we would normally be able to have. So we can't mirror that, but we're gonna have the students actually drive by each of the schools in town. And so they'll make their way on the route that you saw, and they'll end at the high school. Where we'll have a little finale for them, hopefully with a DJ and maybe some other pomp and circumstance that we can do to celebrate them. What else to tell you? So, I mean, to make something like this happen, we definitely want it to be a community event. I think this is something that only a small town like Medfield can make happen successfully. And we'll be relying heavily on the homes along the route to be the best cheerleaders for our seniors as they make a way through town. We have engaged, we asked the all-night grad party committee, who would normally be throwing a very big event for our seniors on their graduating night, if they would be able to support us with volunteers, and without hesitation, they stepped up to want to support the event in a very big way. They have a lot of volunteers working to decorate the town and just make it extra special for the seniors as they work their through town. And Chief Garrett has been very helpful to us and supportive in mapping out the route and working with us to make sure it's a safe event for everyone in town. And obviously we want to be mindful of the time that we're in with the pandemic and COVID, and respecting all of the social distancing guidelines that go along with that. What else can I tell you?
Starts at 1 o'clock up at the Medfield State Hospital. And then you're going to publicize the route. And I thought it was brilliant to award 3 prizes to the best decorated homes along the route. So I think you guys are getting it done.
Yeah, and you know, the all-night grad committee they're being warriors. So every house along the route will receive a flyer with some, you might have seen it. I don't know if Christine got to share it, but encouraging to cheer, honk horns, decorate, send the kids out on the porch with pans and lids and make some noise and just really cheer on our seniors. We do expect the seniors to not be driving. They will have designated drivers in their family, and only their family only. We're asking to be in the car, and we'll have the seniors on the senior side. And they're going to be asked to respect all the normal laws that we would expect when in a vehicle, including seat belts and, you know, being mindful of the public around them. What else? Anything, Chief, that you can think of?
No, first I just want to say it's been a pleasure working with the committee and Dr. Marston on this. I think that we are, as Maud said, trying to be very conscientious of respecting the governor's orders. We've taken some steps to ensure that the teachers are spaced out 6 feet. I know much to the committee's dismay, I've shot down a few of their suggestions just because we don't want to create an environment where the kids are encouraged to get out of their cars. I'm sure it's going to be a very emotional time for them, and they're going to want to see their teachers and have some interaction with them. So we're trying to keep everybody in the vehicles so that we have that natural barrier so they don't get out of the cars and feel inclined to approach their teachers. The challenge for us is going to be that we are anticipating over 200 vehicles. We are going to stage them over at McCarthy Field in the parking lot. We have a design in place where I think we can accommodate about 230 cars. We've worked to stagger the entry times in and out so that we don't disrupt the flow of what's anticipated to also be a busy time at the state hospital. We've worked very diligently to do that. I'm going to provide 4 detail officers along the route, as well as some parent volunteers, so that we can keep the procession moving smoothly and not have a tremendous amount of interruption with the procession, so that it goes faster. But I think that the only concern will be this will disrupt traffic in town for, probably an hour. So we'll do some aggressive efforts the week before to remind and advise the public that there are going to be some alternate routes in place. That being said, I'm so proud to be a part of this. I feel horribly for the students right now and what they've lost. And if this is something that we can provide and help, as a community, then I think it's worth a little bit of aggravation for those people who might have to take an alternate route to their house. I think this is the best way to support the students moving forward. On a side note, I just wanted to say I was so pleased to see Ben's presentation tonight. He really had to change his original presentation. We had been in talks beforehand about what his plan was. So it was nice to see him complete that project as well. And again, just really speaks to the senior class and how well they've adjusted to, the changing circumstances.
I want to thank you, Chief, again for all your support and for the town. It really means a lot. There's 5 senior parent organizers that are on a mission to just make this a great day and appreciate that it takes a village, truly, to make this come together with all of you, Dr. Marsden, Mr. Parga, all the school, everyone in the town, the DPW, fire, police, and obviously just the members of our community. And we're really hoping that they'll come together and just really help make this a special day for our seniors.
I believe the Board of Selectmen will be getting official invitations to be present at the town hall.
Yes, we hope that you will be able to be there and wave everybody on. Maybe bring some bull horns.
Don't encourage us.
I don't know, as long as the chief prohibits all carrying of water balloons in the seniors' cars, I think we're okay.
I think I'll encourage, not prohibit.
We have to be careful who we toss them at. For sure. Are there any questions that can help answer?
Did we lose Pete?
I don't know, he dropped off my screen.
We've lost Pete.
I guess my only question is there anything that you need from the Board of Selectmen besides us showing up as targets for water balloons in front of the town?
You know what? We've been grateful even leading up to this rally, the support that you've given with the signs and just allowing us to demonstrate our love to the seniors throughout the town. I really think that when this is over, it's something that we'll all be really proud of. And I don't want to get emotional, but it's going to be a really nice day.
Sounds good to me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sounds
and
great.
Thank you for all you do. We really appreciate it.
And Pete is back.
There we go.
Technical problems. Thanks for coming in, Mott.
Yep. Pete,
Oh,
we
no
were-
worries.
Sorry to miss a little bit.
Yeah, Pete, we were discussing the fact that the selectmen have agreed to be the targets for water balloons, but then agreed that it's only appropriate for the chair of the Board of Selectmen to be the target for the water balloons.
Absolutely
We are-
appropriate.
We are actually asking the students to decorate their cars So I'm be curious to see how many drive through with masks on the front of their vehicles as they make their way through town. But we're really hoping that the students will have fun with that too.
Excellent.
Thank you, Maud.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming.
Yep, thank you. Good night.
Good night. So our next item is a proclamation for a lot of service to the town of Medfield by George Lester. 25 years, I think, on the planning board.
I'm gonna just make, George is actually at the meeting, so let me just bring him up as a panelist.
So you can probably hear us, George, but we want to be able to see you while we talk about you, I guess. So thank you for coming.
There we go.
I think the other members of the planning board are probably here too. I think Sarah's here. Sarah.
They
Ruppel,
are, the planning
town
board.
planner.
George is on.
Okay, so I've got your proclamation here, George, and I'm going to read it to you. Oh, no.
You're still there.
I am? I can't see you guys. What happened? Okay. Town of Medfield, Certificate of Appreciation. Since coming to Medfield, George Lester embraced his community and engaged in efforts to serve the community in multiple ways. Whereas George was elected to the Medfield Planning Board for 5 consecutive terms from 1995 to 2020. Whereas George is the longest serving member of the planning board. Whereas George worked on land preservation and growth management bylaws as development pressures increased in Medfield. Whereas George's main interests include open space and trails networks, and he worked to ensure public benefits were received in lieu of waivers to the subdivision rules and regulations. Whereas George participated in multiple planning efforts since the closure of Medfield State Hospital. Its institutional knowledge was invaluable in the passage of the Medfield State Hospital District in November 2019. In recognition of the generous time and service to the members of our community, the Medfield Board of Selectmen presents this certificate of appreciation, and we affix our seal of the town on this 12th day of May 2020, and it is signed by the 3 selectmen. Thank you, George.
Well, thank you. I'm really honored. I'm hoping if you can see me and hear me, I am honored. Thank you very much.
Thank
We
you,
can
George.
see you now. Thank you for coming.
Thank you,
Okay.
George.
All right.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
George.
Should I stop by and pick it up in like 4 months when we're open again?
That's probably not a
Yes.
bad idea.
Okay.
We'll
All
get
right.
it to you virtually.
No problem. Thanks so much. All right.
It looks like you have a nice place there, George. It looks like you have a
Yeah.
greenhouse or something.
In my sunroom. Yeah.
Nice.
All right. Thanks. See you guys.
Take care.
Thanks,
Thanks,
George.
George.
Good night.
Okay.
So our next item is the chair of the Board of Health, Carol Reed.
Carol, are we, just before we move on, are we finished
Oh,
with
I'm
our
sorry.
discussion about town meeting, and we're gonna hold that and have
Yeah.
her continue
I-
that until next Tuesday?
I just jumped out of order and I thought that we were going to go back to Scott. Do we want to have more discussion, Scott, about the town meeting at this point?
I don't have anything on my notepad to my right to, advance the discussion, really. I think that as Mark pointed out and everybody's kind of ascertained, we're bounded by certain dates. At some point, I guess we're gonna have a date established in the posting of the warrant so that we can start to continue, if we do decide to continue on those 30-day basis from some date going forward. Right? I mean, if what Mark was saying is that the authority of the selectmen runs through the end of June in terms of being able to establish a date, and also that the selectmen have the authority to be able to limit the articles for that town meeting. At some point, the selectmen seem like they're going to have to choose a date, at least to identify that, and then kind of in consideration of the authority, I guess, that has bestowed to the moderator and also listening to what Carol is going to have to say and the advisories from the Board of Health and other health experts, then some decision will have to be made. I think it's somewhere I read it's 7 days, before the continued date of the town meeting. So, but it does seem like we're going to have to have a date at some point that's going to have to be established. We're at least safe that if the warrant committee were to have its hearing on the 26th of May, that if that date was established as the 27th of June or after, we would have at least provided for the 30 days required by the charter for the holding of the warrant hearing. So that would be number one. Second, that the selectmen would probably take the last possible date that they have the authority to be able to set the date for the town meeting. And I guess that would put into action the opportunity for us to use those emergency provisions in order to be able to begin the process of extending that on a 30-day basis. Mark, is that kind of an accurate discussion of the scenario that we're in now?
Services. I'm sorry, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
So that's been my understanding right along. I participated in some discussions with teleconferencing with a vast group of municipal attorneys and state officials, and that was the process that was repeatedly laid out. So.
And I guess Denise will be staying in touch with us about the status of the legislation relative to the reduction of the quorum, but I don't know that that's going to be a factor, since even at a reduced quorum, we still have, it would be a gathering of substantially more than 10 folks. So we'll still have that consideration. A lot to be learned.
It is possible that the governor's committee that is looking at transitioning would take up town meetings. I would think somebody would bring it to their attention, and that they may find some way of addressing it, such as, a recommendation to use an outdoor facility or an adequate indoor facility or what have you, that reduces, takes the cap off it, but also consistent with social distancing.
Under any circumstances, we would have to be doing this, as safely as we can, which would mean that we would have to figure out some kind of logistics to be able to comply with the social distancing requirements under any circumstance. The quorum would help us because we could have fewer people in attendance, but even at that number, we would still have to set it up, I guess, in an outdoor location and arrange it so that we had created a kind of the geometry of being able to separate everybody participating by at least the required distance. Remember, that we're still going to be waiting for recommendations from the Board of Health, and I guess that's, maybe hearing what Carol has to say next. I'll listen in to see if there's any thoughts. I know that we got the memo today that was informative, and that came from the Massachusetts Association of Health Boards. So it's advisory, it's not controlling, but it's good information.
So I did see one question, Chris.
What is the latest? So Steve Resch is asking, what is the latest date that the BOS can set?
And that's June 30, I think.
Yeah.
So anything else about the town meeting at this point for Scott, or should we move on our agenda?
Sure. Last week I summarized the point. Again, I'm not trying to drive any decisions that we don't want to make, but last week, the point I made was that if we didn't set the date last week, we effectively were deciding it wouldn't be the 15th of June. This week, I think that same logic applies, that it's not going to be the 22nd of June. I'm wondering now whether there's any purpose to our keeping this date open. Well, while the 30th of June may be the absolute latest date we can choose, it sounds highly likely the meeting would have to be outside, which means if it rains on the 30th, then we've, the last day of the month doesn't give us a fallback. So my own thinking here is if we were going to hold a meeting, which right now it appears we cannot actually hold in terms of the restrictions we're operating under, it would be the 27th of June with a rain date of the 29th of June, like we discussed tentatively last week. At this point, I would almost be inclined to suggest we consider officially, legally rescheduling the meeting to the 27th of June, recognizing that right now under our restrictions of having to have a 250-person quorum and the restrictions that we can't have a group of more than 10 people together, we actually are operating under circumstances that will preclude that from happening. But if for some reason the legislature should, do all of the work in the next week that would be required to enable that to be a possibility, that's the viable date that we could run that meeting. It's not the 30th of June, but I think the town moderator, in terms of setting it the latest date possible, my guess is there's not a lot of appreciable difference between the town moderator extending 30 days to the 27th of July and working off those dates than it would be if it was the 30th. That keeps open the possibility of us conducting a meeting on the 27th of June if a whole bunch of things happen essentially between now and next week, probably. And then otherwise we're done with it. We've made our decision about the date. If the date can't happen, the town moderator moves into action by extending it under the authority of the emergency, and we don't have to deal with this anymore. I don't know how much smarter we're going to be in a week than we are right now.
I think that makes sense myself. Mike? I would pick the 27th at this point too.
I agree with that, Gus, and we'll have, I think we have up until a week before that meeting to postpone it if we need to. Absent legislation, perhaps I know other towns are looking at the prospect of an outdoor town meeting. I don't know how many people saw the pictures of the Air Force Academy graduation, which is actually kind of impressive. They had each of them in their little square in their chairs, and we may be able to have some logistics in place where even if there wasn't legislation, maybe we could get a waiver for the purpose of conducting the meeting if we did it with the right regulations. So I agree with Gus. I think we should let's set it as the 27th so we can get the warrant hearing in place and work towards that date. And if we can't have it, then we do have some fallback. Scott can extend the meeting. We can do the 1/12 budget routine for a little while. But I think that's wise, Gus. We're not going to have this on the 15th.
So I would just ask Mark and Chris whether we need a vote, whether you guys want to vote on that at this point.
Yes, please.
Chris is saying yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So I would move that we reschedule
just for a second, Scott, I'm trying to read your face here. Is there anything about that gives you pause?
No, not at all. I like that idea.
Okay.
I think it's better to have a date established. I think that's a good recommendation.
Okay.
If we're going to plan outside, are we going to plan a rain date for the 29th?
Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So I would move that we reschedule the annual town meeting to Saturday, June 27th. We want to say 11 o'clock in the morning, 1 o'clock. What time?
I think 11's good.
11 o'clock in the morning on Saturday, June 27th, with a rain date on Monday, June 29th at 6 p.m.
You don't actually have to set the rain date, because as long as if you've established a date and time, it's outdoors, and then there's adverse weather, then the moderator has the authority by the statute as it exists presently to then continue it because of the weather conditions.
Perfect.
Second.
All right, Mr. Murby.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Yep.
And Mr. Marcucci also aye.
Excellent. Anything else, Scott? Or are we all set?
We're set. We're good. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank you so
appreciated.
much.
Yeah, we'll stay tuned. Okay.
Our next item on our agenda then is Carol Reed, Chair of our Board of Health. Welcome, Carol. Thank you for coming.
Let me just promote her. Give me 1 second. There she is.
Little did you know the Board of Health was going to be so monumentally active this year when you so kindly joined. Can't hear you. You're muted.
Go.
Alt A, there you
Thank
go.
you. Oh, yeah. This has become a regular part of all our lives. It's nice to see you all. And I want to let you know that I understand the hour is late, but there are some points I wanted to cover. And I just want to, first of all, thank Christine and Chief Carrico and Chief Garrett and Jeff for all their hard work. And of course, all the staff in the town and you all. The Board of Health is grateful. It's important, I think, listening to this whole conversation, wonderful to have Representative Garlick with us. I feel like, and I want to say, the other Board of Health members are on tonight and are participating. And I just want to say, for those that don't know, I'm grateful to have them. They're experts in medicine and public health and epidemiology, and young parents committed to Medfield. And Steve and Holly and Melissa, I'm profoundly grateful to have them all have been appointed this year and be able to work with them during this unprecedented time, this global pandemic. So with that being said, I did want to mention that, you know, local boards of health through Mass General Law 111 have the statutory authority to protect public health through a big part of that is to track and control infectious and communicable diseases. And as we know and have lived through, these health and public health decisions haven't been easy for people. And but I want to say, and I know the Board of Health feels the same, that we're really proud of the people in Medfield, the residents who live here. I've been here 28 years and I know we've all talked. These are unbelievably stressful and hard times. There's a lot of loss with tradition and connection. And I want you to know that we all appreciate that loss. So we value public health and advocate for decisions for public health, but also we understand stress and the mental health that accompanies all this. And we haven't lost sight of that. So trying to balance what our charge is in public health with understanding what people are going through and the need to be connecting with others and healthy and outside is certainly something that we think about every day. So we keep all those things in mind, and we've appreciated Chief Garrett because she's really worked hard to try to, as the enforcement arm of which is written now in the governor's orders, it's not an easy position. So we've issued advisory letters for masks, and you know the work, and we've tried to balance public health and those decisions with also respecting people's ability to move around and also the feelings of some controls during this time that we really don't have that feeling of control. So I appreciate you listening to that. And I just want you to know that Holly and Melissa and Steve are amazing and committed experts. The other thing, it's with time, I won't go into, I'll answer questions. I go on through my work. I'm on the local Board of Health calls with the COVID team representative and weekly, and then the Maven webinars. So I can answer any questions that you want, but I do want to also say a thank you. One of our young Medfield people, Sam Aronson, who graduated Medfield High School 2011. He works at String King in California, and he donated 2,000 masks to Medfield, and they'll be here tomorrow. So I wanted to make sure I thanked Sam, who thought of us and thought of Medfield for 3-layer masks that I'll be giving to Christine for her to do with whatever she and you all feel is the need for Medfield to use those. So I wanted to take a minute and make sure I said that. Rep. Garlick talked about the governor making decisions based on data. We all know, you're all informed. Today, our call talked about the slow phase in, the 4 phases. So as far as specifics, those specifics will not come out until May 18th. And people are waiting anxiously through these calls. There's hundreds of people on these calls from local boards of health every Tuesday and Friday. So I don't have exact things except lots of printouts I could share, but I'm happy to answer questions. And I'll also say if any of the other board members want to speak, I know Christine has been good to us and would allow us that.
Any questions, Gus or Mike?
Carol, I had one question. Just I was anticipating with the 4-phase rollout that the governor's mentioned. I wasn't sure. Is there does our local Board of Health need to take those phases and interpret, modify, explain, or do anything, or will those phases just come out and then everybody in town will kind of know who can do what, and the Board of Health just enforces that? I wasn't sure whether it required interpretation or not.
Well, I'm not sure of your question. Will give guidance, and we work with Christine and Nancy Bonatti, of course. And do you mean like, are we going to reinterpret or post or?
No, I wasn't necessarily thinking about reinterpret, if that means change what the governor said, but I was thinking if, I'm not knowing exactly what those phases look like. I was picturing the governor characterizing perhaps certain kinds of businesses that open up first, and then you have different businesses in town that say, yes, that's us. Does it require the Board of Health? Is that who figures out whether that's true? Or if it is an eligible business, does the Board of Health establish the standards that need to be in place in order to qualify? I just really wasn't sure whether it's just a matter of saying, read what the governor said and we're here to make sure you do it, or whether there is an interpretation, not changing the intent, but applying the intent.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Yes, go ahead, Mark Zarell.
Yeah, my understanding is that the committee that the Lieutenant Governor is chairing is going to come out with detailed regulations or guidances as to how this gets implemented as they proceed. And,
yeah,
largely appeals like for what's considered to be a essential business or a non-essential, and what requirements they have to make. The appeal will be to the state people.
Mm-hmm. And for example, we have Bridget Sweet, who's the health agent. She works with Nancy and Christine. She's been working with the essential businesses. We have a meeting every week. To give this a tangible look, how are the grocery stores complying with the governor's guidance and cleaning the carts and the employees wearing masks and having 25 people in the store at once. So we follow what the state DPH guidelines are, and then we make sure they're implemented and interpreted and followed up on. And Bridget and Nancy and Christine keep us informed. Of course, a catalyst might be a resident call or an inquiry. Being concerned, is that an essential business? Is that not? So yes, so the guidelines as an example for essential business with say a grocery store, and then are we locally adhering to and following up on the guidance or the order that the governor stated for that business? There can't be curbside pickup, or there are pages and pages, and we try to be responsive to the changes during the week. The list of essential business has grown. So it is our responsibility to monitor that and to communicate those details and to follow up. And if there's any kind of an issue, which there has been, and that's normal in a course of business, then the health agent will go out and follow up and make sure that things are happening. You know, there's an ability to give a fine and a ticket. And that's why I talked about Chief Garrett. I mean, even with social distancing, we've tried to be, and Bridget has said, and Nancy, and of course us all living here, the great thing I feel about Medfield is the business owners, they want to do the right thing. They value and understand the reasoning behind these tough decisions. It's heartbreaking when you think of finances, but and other considerations. But yeah, we are responsible to make sure that it's clear the rules, who's essential, who's not, and then following through.
So, excuse me, Mr. Chair, just to augment what Carol was saying, it is possible that the transition team will delegate discretion back to local boards of health in particular issues. I can bring up an example because it doesn't apply to Medfield, but this golf course opening thing, there was a certain amount of discretion that was given back to the local municipalities as to how that was to be implemented on a case-by-case basis. So it's entirely possible in particular circumstances that the Board of Health would be vested with discretion as to how to implement, or it could be hard and fast. It just depends.
They talked about, you know, for example, today, recreation, parks, would tennis be available? That might be on the list first because that can be one-to-one and at a distance, but basketball courts, not acceptable. And I'm giving you some basic guidelines. So the details on these calls that people want to know because their communities are asking. There are myriad variations. So people are really looking forward to this May 18th document of different structures and businesses and timing, even, summer camps. And there's so many things that are up in the air, and they're very difficult decisions, and we'll do our best. And again, that's why every Board of Health meeting and other times I've thanked Christine because she's worked an unbelievable amount of hours. Many other towns have a big bench with these folks. So she's the one who's we've been partnering with, and we appreciate that. Not an easy job.
Carol, how often has your Board of Health been meeting?
Weekly. We meet weekly.
Yeah.
On Zoom. We Zoom. Yep. And you're welcome anytime. This week it's Friday at 11. Feel free, and I don't know if there are any other, but ask whatever. I tend to like to talk, and I know Steve and Holly and Melissa are available too. But and I'm happy to come back another time.
I do have a follow-up. I bet you this is a dumb question, so I'm ready for it. Let me give you a hypothetical, and it's probably not quite the right thing, but what I was getting at around the Board of Health's role. Let's say that the governor in one of these phases says, okay, it's okay for restaurants to open up now, but obviously they have to open up under circumstances of proper social distancing or safeguards. I've seen stories. So one answer is, so every table in a restaurant is at least 6 feet away from another table. And I've heard people talk about the economics of restaurants and how basically that makes it virtually impossible for a restaurant to operate profitably. And I won't pick, well, I will pick restaurants, but I'm not deliberately picking them. So I'm picking like a Nosh and Grog that has limited seating. And let's say Nosh and Grog says, well, what we want to do is we can't make this work with only tables 6 feet apart. What we have is a a system of plexiglass walls in between tables. So they're closer than 6 feet, but we have shields. So we basically can have the density that we want to have. I'm not sure if the governor's guidance will be so specific as to say what practices are acceptable. And what my question was, is would that then fall to the Board of Health to determine whether a particular way, and I was probably thinking more about businesses than, you know, parks. Does the Board of Health have a role in determining whether a proposed set of precautionary measures is adequate, or is that all prescriptive coming down from the state and you comply with what the state says or you can't do it?
Well, Mark will probably say this better than I. We have the authority to make, we have the authority to make stricter, right, guidelines, but we can't disprove, or my words are slow here. I can't not do what the state says, but we can make stricter. I don't know that we can loosen.
Basically, you can't take action that's inconsistent with the state mandate, whatever that happens to be. So as I said earlier, it may well be on a certain model that a certain amount of discretion is delegated to the local boards of health to understanding how individualized this is, or it could be very detailed and go on for pages. So it's cut and dried, and there is no discretion, because there've been extended discussions are ongoing already with various trade associations, business groups, etc., lobbying on behalf of their membership for what's workable. So there's been a lot of efforts gone into this already. So yeah, and just a by the way scenario that was discussed in a phone conversation I took part in this week with Ralph Sacramone, the executive director of the ABCC, turns around that issue of expanding restaurant with alcoholic beverage footprints outside what they have currently, and the requirement that if that's done, that they have to file an amendment under the current legislation that's in place, the existing statute. That's a rather unwieldy process. Unless the legislature provides relief in that regard, there has to be a notice and posted hearing to expand alcohol premises beyond what they are. There's been talk about restaurants moving out to parking lots on a temporary basis, what have you. And so that's another element here.
So I think the Board of Health at their meeting last Friday, and they have been incredibly supportive of our local businesses, and we've been putting things into place to allow our businesses to do the curbside, to do things that they wouldn't normally do. One of the things we talked about last Friday was that we will probably need some emergency meetings in the not too distant future. As the governor starts to hand down this legislation, the Board of Health wants to act as fast as possible to help our restaurants and our other businesses. This morning, I had Sarah start contacting all of the businesses and the restaurants in particular to talk about what happens if they do allow outdoor seating. And one of the things the town administrators and the MMA were talking about today was seeking relief from the ABCC to allow us to do that. And allow those liquor licenses to carry outside in a wider area. So Sarah is actively talking to those businesses about where they could locate outside, what they would need, if they're even interested in doing that. And then I will work with the Board of Health this Friday to start preparing plans for that with our Board of Health agents so that we can act as quickly as possible.
So the ABCC is prepared to turn those around quickly. The problem, the logjam at the moment is that the existing statute that's on the books requires a modification, which is a notice and hearing situation. So unless the legislature provides relief to expedite that, the best you can do is anticipate it, get your notices out, schedule the hearings, and then as soon as you get the information to the ABCC, they're prepared to act on it.
Thank you. So again, we will come back. We'll happy to answer any questions and just, I hope you all feel confident that the board you appointed is they're great experts and great advocates. And I'm trying to do what I can to give all the state and DPH information and the governor's information. So with Christine and Nancy and Bridget, we're trying to get everybody safe and healthy and working.
So Carol, speaking for me, I am deeply grateful for the combination of talent, skills, experience, connections you collectively do. I realize that that's turned into a job that was far greater than anything that I suspect any of you had, and I'm glad you're all on, so you hear this. I also am deeply grateful for what I would think of as the level-headedness you've brought into this. Part of what was behind my question is I'm very sensitive to the fact that you all stood up and recommended or supported the idea of keeping the hospital open at a time when a lot of other open spaces in the area didn't. And I think that has made a difference, not interestingly enough, not just for Medfield, but for a lot of people. And I think it was a right call, but it was clearly not a call that other places and organizations had made. And I don't say I'm grateful for that because I thought you were sloppy about your standards. I am grateful for that because I thought you brought a depth of thought to it that, you know, it seems to me to have been the prudent decision, as difficult as that balance was. So I thank all of you for that.
Thank you.
I would second the thanks to you, Carol, and to all of the committee for the board for everything you've been doing. I know it's a lot more than was expected, but we're very appreciative.
Thank you.
I will add my thanks as well and say that I feel we are in very good hands with all of you, and appreciate the time you put in and your good judgment and expertise, and grateful to all that you do in your professional lives as well in dealing with this crisis and cutting out time for the town of Medfield. We're really lucky to have you, and thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate it. And I'm proud of Medfield, and I know the board is too. All of you, all ages, people have stepped up, and people are kind here, and it's not always popular, but we're trying and we're doing a great job.
Thank you for making us better.
Thank you.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you.
So I guess I just share one of the facts that I learned in the past week, which was that the public safety building that they, I don't think about the fact that they're basically operating 24 hours a day, but I learned that they are basically disinfecting the facility 3 times a day. So I was impressed to hear that. Chris, I don't know what you wanted to go on to next. It says COVID next on our list, but
We've covered a lot of those items tonight. I do have one thing to update you on, and that was the Memorial Day Parade. I promised to get you a date and their plan for that. So that is going to be March 25th at noon. Frank Iafola from the Memorial Day Committee notified me today that the 4 churches in Medfield will ring their bells for a full minute at noon. And John Thompson has agreed to ring the church bell at the chapel at the state hospital. So we'll do that May 25th at noon. The only other item I had tonight was to talk about where we were on the budget and to notify you there's a request from the warrant committee that the warrant committee, the school committee, and the Board of Selectmen meet next Monday at the warrant committee meeting to discuss and everybody be on the same page about what we're talking about with local aid cuts and come up with a plan of how we're going to address that in terms of the split between the schools and the town. So I think I sent everybody an email last night. If you can be there at 7 o'clock on Monday, that would be great. Zoom, of course.
Christine, not to put you on the spot, but given the inability of Representative Garlick to give us a planning number for what those cuts are you in a position at this point to tell us what our planning number is relative to those cuts.
I
For-
think
for
I've
purposes
been,
of money.
to be honest, I've been working with a number in my head for about the last week and a half and running some scenarios on that. I think I may have changed that a little bit tonight, but I want to take the opportunity to get some feedback from the financial team before I share that with everybody else.
Great, thanks.
There's a few of them still in the building that will be waiting for me tomorrow if I share that too soon. One of the things that did happen at the warrant committee meeting last night, just to keep you updated, I've been very clear in talking repeatedly that I wanted to balance a pre-COVID budget. As you know, we had a $1.3 million deficit before this even began, and I thought it was very important that we address that issue before we even begin to talk about our reductions in local aid. The school committee presented last night, Dr. Marsden and Michael LaFrancesca presented $915,000 in school committee cuts. School committee has actually not officially voted on those yet. There were recommendations, but they were presented last night. I think that $915,000 in combination with the $339,000 worth of cuts that we've been working on will get us closer, if not to a balanced budget. There's some work that we have to do to finalize some things, but I think we're very close to getting our pre-COVID budget balanced, and we'll plan on doing that before Monday. So that as soon as we have an agreement on Monday of what our local aid reduction will be, we'll start working on what that scenario will be when we have town meeting.
And just to be clear, Christine, those, when you say cuts, those are reductions from the previous
Correct.
budget proposals. Those are not actual cuts from the number. The number in this budget is still higher than last year's budget.
Yes.
It's just lower than what was requested in the previous proposal.
Yes, when I say cuts, I'm referring to what the fiscal year 21 requests were.
Sure. Just to make sure for anybody watching at home who would misinterpret what the government means when it talks about cuts, it's not the same thing that other people would say they talk about cuts. It's when you start with the proposed number and you reduce it to a lower proposed number, that becomes a cut. But this is not a reduction from the fiscal year 2020 budget.
Although I think once we move past the post-COVID budget, we will be talking about exactly that.
There may be actual cuts at that point, but at least what you're talking about are reductions in the current proposed budgets, not reductions from last year's approved budgets.
Correct.
Thank you.
Anything else on the list, Chris, that you wanted to cover?
No, I'll send you out. I have 2 versions of the warrant now. I'll send you out the full version with the 42 articles, and I pared it down to 15 articles tonight.
Okay.
That I thought were just budget, and I meant to share those tonight, and I'll send those when I get back in the office.
All right. Anything else from town administrator report standpoint, or have you covered everything?
I think I've covered everything.
Selectmen reports, Mr. Marcucci?
Only quickly from me, there's going to be another meeting of the Dale Street School Building Committee tomorrow night, and the committee is also in the process of scheduling a couple of public forums or fora to, again, it will be by Zoom or some other electronic video meeting of some kind. I believe both for next week. And Christine, one of them that came through today was originally going to be on the 19th at 7 p.m., which coincides with one of our meetings. I don't think that's a problem. I think they're also going to schedule one during the day next week. But I'll just have to miss that public forum. It's an additional information session beyond the one was held. It was held in early March, was the last one we did. So, but the committee's meeting tomorrow night and the public forums will be next week.
The other thing is, if the selectmen are meeting on Monday to discuss issues with the warrant committee, if there were any small items, we could take them up Monday night, and then everybody could do the forum on the 19th. Want to do that?
Capital idea from my point of view.
Okay.
Or we could take those up on the 18th and still not do the forum on the 19th.
That's your choice.
Yeah, okay.
Gus, anything?
I don't think I have anything to report. Nope.
I've got 2 things. Medfield Foundation met last night, and I'll just share that the COVID-19 relief fund that they have started has done very well and has helped a number of people already. Tens of thousands of dollars has been raised. And so that was nice to hear. The other thing is that I went to a Mass Municipal Association meeting last Friday, I think it was, with the Medfield Select Board Association and the City Councilors Association. Learned a couple interesting things. First figure was that the Mass Rainy Day Fund is 3.5 billion. And the second figure was that the CARES Act, the federal relief, provided Massachusetts with 2.67 billion. So it's good that there was a lot of money in the rainy day fund when this happened. And that's it for me. Oh, the other thing that from that meeting was that they said the Senate had refused to allow the remote annual town meetings for some reason. And that's it. Anything else? Or are we ready to adjourn?
I think you can adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Mr. Murby,
Aye.
Mr. Peterson, Mr. Marcucci, aye. Bye, everybody.
Thank
Good
you.
night. Thanks.
Have a good night.